So I've recently been rewatching the very popular Amazon Prime series, The Man in the High Castle, which if you haven't watched it, I highly recommend it. It's a very I'd say realistic take a situation on what if the Second World War had gone slightly differently and the Axis had won the war instead. Um, and it doesn't just focus on the Nazi Empire. It obviously focuses on the other sort of main player of the Axis, the Japanese Empire, and the show. The majority of the show, all four series, really focus on the American continent, the which has been kind of divided into three areas of from the east. There's obviously the great Nazi Greater Reich, which covers the majority of the continent, and then from the west we have the Japanese Empire, and in the middle is sort of this sort of buffer zone, this neutral zone, where the sort of the remnants of the American U.S. Army are kind of they're kind of pushing for the first three series they're not really disturbed until obviously at the end of at the beginning of season two, I think, spoilers, obviously Hitler is assassinated by one of the higher ranking Nazi officials, and it's essentially the Germans start to push into the neutral zone, and which obviously starts to upset the Japanese Empire on the other side of that neutral zone, and it all kind of kicks off from there. And I'm not. I personally haven't read the books. Obviously know that because obviously a big part of the series as well is the whole science fiction side of it, where it's the Man in the High Castle is essentially a collector of films from other dimensions. One being, well, our world essentially, where obviously things played out as they happened in real life history, where we won the war, and America was and Europe was as it always was essentially, and to be honest, that whole aspect of the show isn't my favorite part of it. It's I prefer like the situation alone is has enough intrigue to it just because of how grand and kind of opposite to the real world it is, and that the whole concept of seeing that alternate history alone it is should be enough, but obviously they had to credit the book, and bring in the whole like interdimensional travel side of it, but the whole conflict between the Japanese Empire and the Germans is enough for me, and I feel like the whole sci-fi plot point doesn't. I wouldn't say it doesn't fit. It's just it's not really necessary. But a part of obviously I haven't read the book, but a part of the sort of the world in general, which isn't really explored that much, is obviously the European front. There's when during the show when they show kind of maps of the world, and obviously you can see that the most of it is dominated by the Nazis. There's another neutral zone in Eastern Europe, which is mostly Russia, and though Moscow and the main kind of parts of Russia and those countries have been taken, there's still a neutral zone there, which by looks of it is even bigger than the neutral zone in America. In fact, the American one just looks like a sliver compared to this one. So I kind of came up with the idea of what if there was a Amazon Prime did a like a spin-off series that took place along during the same timeline of the first four series, but it focuses on the European front, and obviously there's a wider gap between the front lines of the Nazis and the Japanese there. So that sort of area, there's, I mean, there likely be a large population there. Maybe you could have the remnants of the Soviet Union government have kind of they've fallen back into those areas, and and have basically formed into this super elite communist party. And I always sort of wondered why neither sides like attempted to take those areas, and they never really went into it, and maybe it's because there's something, maybe it's because there's a sort of an elite fanatical regime in there that is potentially more extreme than the Japanese and the Nazis combined. So it's, delving into that a bit more, and focusing on those characters, and ditch the whole like sci-fi element of it. I don't think that would be needed, and obviously as it would be taking place during along the same timeline, we could hear about events that are the critical events that are taking place within the series. So you hear on like the radio that Himmler's been assassinated. Obergruppenführer Smith has become Reichsmarshal and is attempting to essentially eliminate the remaining Native Americans and non Aryan descendants, and maybe on the European front there is even more of a tension between the Nazis and the Japanese. But I think kind of creating a new kind of third sort of faction that as I said is like a evolution of the Soviet Union. I think that would be quite interesting, and just because obviously that the whole story of how Stalin basically kicked Hitler's ass in real life, but it's interesting to see what would happen if they had kind of folded over early and retreated essentially into more desolate parts of Russia. So yeah, that's I mean, Amazon Prime, if you're listening, if you're looking for writers, I'm your man. But yeah, if anyone's a fan out there of the series, let me know what you think, and maybe I'm just a bit of a dumbass and I haven't read up on things. Maybe in the book they focus a bit more on that side of things. But yeah, thank you for listening.